Hi, I'm Valeria Latham from Cake Magic, and I'm delighted to have been invited by Paul Bradford to show you how to make this delightful little ragdoll and handbag cake.
I think it's a wonderful cake and it's a really good one to add to your portfolio, so hopefully you come along and enjoy watching this one.
Okay, we're going to start off by covering the board. There's several ways you can cover the board. Today I've decided to make it stripy. We're going to roll out some fondant. It's best to give your fondant a good knead before you roll it, get it nice and warm in your hands, and it's much more pliable. And we're going to paint the board with some water so that the fondant sticks to the board. So I've got the fondant ready, all nice and pliable. We're going to sprinkle a little bit of cornstarch, and just basically roll out a nice circle to cover the board. Okay. You don't need to have it thick. I'm using 250 grams of fondant and it's a 12-inch board, so that's ample. Try and keep your fondant in a circular shape. It's easier if you can do that. Okay, almost there. This fondant that I'm using today is made in Spain. It's by Silicone Gold, and it's by far the best fondant I've ever used. I've been making cakes for 30 odd years now. It's absolutely brilliant, so if you can get your hands on some, I would recommend it highly. Okay, I think we've got enough here now to cover the 12-inch. Okay, so I've prepared the board with a little sprinkling of water. So we just basically lift the fondant onto the board. Push from the middle to expel any air bubbles. Okay. So we just need to trim off the excess fondant from the board. I'm just using the edge of a palette knife, which is perfect for doing the job. Okay, this is a very old-fashioned turntable of Paul's that he's loaned me for doing this job, and it's got some clamps for doing extension work, and it's a bit difficult to get around the clamps, but just be patient and you can just trim the board and it looks fine. Okay, we're going to put some stripes on the board today. There's several ways you can do that. Today we're just going to place them on the top and gently roll them into the blue fondant. We're going to attach them using some water, just a tiny little bit, and we're going to make the stripes in white. So again, using a small amount of white fondant, we need to knead the fondant and manipulate it really well before we try to roll it. And then once we've worked it for a couple of minutes, we can roll it into a nice thin piece, and using a pizza wheel we'll cut some thin stripes, then attach them to the top of the blue board. Fairly straightforward. Don't need much cornstarch for doing this job. Okay. meant to represent a rug in a child's room, so it doesn't matter if they go a little bit squiggly, the lines, but we do try to get them straight if we can. Okay, I think that's plenty. So I'm going to use a pizza wheel. Everyone normally has one of these in the kitchen. It's not specialised or anything. It's great in sugarcraft actually. I find mine invaluable. I think maybe about 6 should be enough. 6 thin stripes. You can put as many as you want. Try and get the strips as even as you can. And I'm making them longer than it's necessary, obviously, so that we have that little extra bit to trim off on the ends. Okay, I think that's plenty. So using some water. Literally, you don't need much water. It's best to just put a tiny little bit on the back of the strip. Otherwise it will be too, it will slide all over the board. I'm going to put them diagonally. Well, we're going to have the cake diagonally, so it'll look rather more interesting than just straight. So literally just a tiny little bit of water is all you need. If you put too much water on at this stage, what will happen is when you roll the white into the blue, all the water will squirt out of the sides and it will make a sticky mess on your board. So be careful not to attach too much water to the strips. Okay, 3. Okay. A little bit more. Try and put the stripes as evenly as you can with the same amount of space between them. Okay, we're almost there. 2, 4, 5, 6. I think actually on this board I'm going to need 7. I think 6 isn't enough. Yeah, I'm going to just put a little one on either end just to finish it off. So I'm going to cut this in half. And then just put one at the end like that. And the other half can go on the other end. Okay, so I'm going to take it off the turntable at this stage and I'm going to use my rolling pin to gently roll in the stripes before I trim them. Okay. So we're just going to press lightly on the rolling pin. Try not to get the stripes to go too wiggly. Okay, we have one little wiggle, but that won't matter because we're actually going to cover that bit with the cake anyway, so I'm quite happy with that at this stage. I'm just going to trim the rest of the excess off now. And then we can put this board to one side because I'm actually going to ice the cake on a separate board. And then once we have it covered, then I'm going to attach it to this board because it makes it much neater. Once we've trimmed this now, we're going to set this to one side, and in the next lesson we're going to carve the cake and cover it with the ganache. Okay, we're just almost there now. Okay, that's perfect. We have got a slight squiggle here, but we're not really worried about that too much because it will be covered once the cake is on the board. So we're going to set this to one side, and the next lesson we're going to start to carve the cake. Okay, so now we're going to start by carving the cake, ready for it to be ganached and then fondant iced. Okay, now it's best, I have two round 8-inch cakes here. It's rather a tall cake because we're making a child's basket. Normally I would tend to use an oval cake because there's less waste. We haven't managed to be able to get oval cakes today, so there will be quite a bit of excess cut away from the cake. But we can use that, we can always freeze it and reuse it with something else, so it won't be thrown in the bin. Waste not, want not. Okay, I'm going to start by levelling off the cakes and then attaching each cake on top of each other, and then we can start carving the shape of the basket. So I'm just going to cut away the domed, this is Madeira cake by the way, and we're going to use a white chocolate ganache to fill it and cover it. I'm going to cut a little bit more than that off. We want to make sure that the other cake actually sits on top of cake and not the crusty bit that's on the outside of the cake. So we want it all to be yellow, yellow sponge that's visible. So I'm just going to trim until we get to the pure yellow sponge or Madeira. You can use sponge, it doesn't really matter. You can use chocolate cake, whatever you desire really. Okay. Now what I like to do is place that on the top of there, but I like to remove this as well because I like it all to be the sponge inside, not with brown, the brown colour in between the layers. So I always tend to take a very thin slice off the top until we come to the yellow bit once again. I think it's important when you cut into a cake that you don't see the brown layers in between. If you've had to make a tall cake, it doesn't look very professional. So okay, we're almost there now. This is like a serrated bread knife. That's all you need really. Okay. I think that's okay now. Okay, now we're going to sit that on top of this one. And then we're going to proceed to take the domed bit off the second cake. And this gives us the height that we're going to need to make the basket. Okay. Okay. Now obviously the basket isn't a round shape, it's more of an oval shape. That's why, if you can, it's probably best to use oval tins. I'm just going to cut across the cake into like a moon shape, if you like. Right down to the bottom at this stage. Okay, so we've taken a sort of segment like a smiley face, a smiley mouth off one side. I'm just checking that it's all even all the way down. Okay, and now we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. You can always use this and make a trifle, all this excess sponge. What I normally do is if I have quite a lot of excess on a cake, I freeze it, and it's always handy when you're making different shaped cakes. Sometimes you haven't got enough in the cake that you've baked and you can just grab a bit from the freezer. That's what I tend to do. Okay. Now this is still a little bit wide, actually wider than I need, so I'm going to take another strip off each side, and then we'll have the right depth. Okay. Now when I do a tall cake, I like to try and keep the base as wide as possible, because obviously you want to be able to balance the cake on the board, and if it's too thin at the bottom you might end up having problems. So I'm going to keep the base. We now are ending up with this sort of shape, which is like, well, it's like a rugby ball, an oval sort of shape. That's it now. I'm quite happy with that shape. So now we can start carving the sides of the cake, because we just want to make the shape go this way a little bit. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm just going to take the shape slightly, very slightly in at each side, and then I'm going to round these corners off. You can see what I'm doing. Okay, this is the boring bit of doing your cake. Basically just have a fiddle until you're happy with the shape. Okay. I'm just going to go in at the bottom very slightly, because it's just slightly too square. Okay, we're almost there, guys. That looks slightly lopsided, so I've taken a little bit more off the top. I think that's a good shape now. One little bit there I've missed. Now if you stand back and have a good look at the shape and you're happy with it, then we can start to ganache. Okay, I'm quite happy with that shape now. Little girl's basket. Now, the only thing we have to do now is cut a section out of the top of the cake to make it look like it's obviously a hollow basket, but we don't want to cut too much away. It's just to give it a little indent at the top. So I'm leaving about 1 inch all the way round, or 2 centimetres for you youngsters. And then I'm just going to go in at probably 2 or 3 centimetres at the top of the cake, just so that it looks as if the basket does have an interior. Okay, that's fine. You can use a smaller knife to do this, it's probably easier. I don't know my way around this kitchen very well, so... Okay, I think that's just about it now. Now, because this is Madeira cake, you can compress it a little bit. That's it. Right, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a basket shape with a little interior. Now we can put it on a separate board, not the board that we've previously iced, and we can start to ganache the cake. Okay, so now I'm just going to pop this on my board. I need to attach it with a small amount of ganache, which I have here prepared, just so as it doesn't slide around on the board. Okay, while I'm trying to ganache it. Okay, we need to cut this cake another couple of times because, just to be honest with you, just one layer of ganache isn't enough in a big tall cake like this. If I prefer to cut it twice, and then we've got 3 layers of ganache in the middle of the cake. It's up to you, quite frankly. If you're not used to doing tall cakes, maybe it's better for you to just have the 1 layer of ganache because it might be easier for you to work with. If you're confident that you can work with more layers, then we'll put more layers. I like to put at least 3 layers in my cakes, so I'm going to cut it across twice. Now, before you do anything else, always make sure that you mark your cake so that you know which way to put the cake back when you separate the layers. That's quite important, because if you don't do that and you put it back the wrong way, you could make it unlevel, or it just doesn't sit right. So I'm going to take the layers apart now. I know which way they go back. And I'm just going to put a thin layer of ganache between each level. Basically, don't go too mad because you don't want the cake to be sliding all over the place. But the beauty of the ganache, I'm assured, is that it does set very quickly. And so you avoid those sort of problems. This makes a great change for me because I've come from Spain and I've been working in 40-degree heat for the last 6 weeks. So it's a pleasure to come to Scotland and work in this nice temperature. I'm sure nobody else will agree with me if you live here. Okay, so we've actually piled it back together. And now we're going to coat the sides with the ganache. So just take it up each. When I'm doing a cake like this and I'm attaching it to a pre-covered board, I try not to put too much buttercream, ganache, whatever we're using, near the bottom of the cake. Because what happens is, when you attach it to your pre-iced board, it can get a bit sticky and messy. So I try to just put the minimum amount that you would need to stick the fondant to it. Okay, once you've covered it, then you can use a scraper and neaten it all off. So don't worry too much when you're applying your ganache to begin with. It is a bit of a messy process. Okay. Okay, once you're sure it's all covered, then you can do the top and the inside. Okay. Just going to place a little bit on the inside. It's lovely and soft to use, this ganache, I must say. I'm going to have a go when I go back to Spain with this. Paul's given me the recipe, so quite excited to have a go at working with ganache, really. Okay, I'm going to smooth it as much as I can now, and then I'll get the scraper onto it, just to neaten it up a little bit. And then we're going to pop it into the fridge for a few minutes until it sets. It literally takes minutes. So, okay. And then once it's set in the fridge for a few minutes, we're going to get some boiling water. Using a palette knife, we're just going to tidy up the messy bits before we put the fondant onto the top of the cake. there. Okay, we're nearly there now. What I use when I make a tall cake, and everybody obviously will use, is some dowels to steady the cake, because we don't want it to slide about and move. So it's always a good idea to use some dowels. I'm using some wooden dowels that I've already pre-cut today, but you can buy plastic ones. There's a new bubble straw type of dowel. There's all sorts of things that you can use. And I normally place one either side, right down to the bottom of the cake, and that steadies the cake and it stops it from moving around. Okay, so I'm going to pop it into the fridge for a couple of minutes now until it sets, and then we will tidy up the ganache with the palette knife and the hot water, and then we'll be ready to fondant ice the cake. I've just taken the cake out of the fridge, and now I've just poured some boiling water into a jug, anything really, and using a palette knife or a scraper, we're just going to tidy it up a little bit, and then we're going to roll out the fondant and cover it. Okay, so to be honest with you, I think I'm going to use my palette knife. I feel happier with my palette knife because I'm used to using it. So I'm just putting it in the hot water and gently just smooth it as much as possible. It's not really one of those cakes where you have to have it completely perfect, because actually we're covering the cake with a layer of thin fondant, and then we're coating it again with a fabric effect, so you won't actually see any imperfections on the cake at all when it's finished. I must say though, I think I'm being converted to this lovely ganache. It's amazing. I think I'm ready to cover this now with fondant. Lovely. Okay, so we'll put that to one side. Now, to cover the cake initially, we're going to use a cream coloured fondant. I've pre-coloured this cream because in Spain, believe it or not, you can't buy cream fondant, which is quite weird. But so I've had to pre-colour it with food colouring, the white. But what we're going to do, we're going to cover completely the bag with the cream. I don't think I'm going to need all of that, so I'm going to just... I need to put this to one side for the fabric effect. Well, the basket weave effect, rather. Okay. Now, as I said earlier when we were covering the board, it's really important to work your fondant before you start rolling. I never use icing sugar to roll fondant. I always use cornstarch. I find it's far less sticky. I'm going to give this a really good knead because it's quite cold. I don't normally have to knead it as much in Spain because of the difference in temperature, but this needs quite a lot of work. So we're going to... It only needs to be a thin coat, the first coat, because there's nothing worse, I think, than biting into a slice of cake with thick fondant all over it. I think it tastes foul. So I try to keep it as thin as possible because we are attaching the effect on top of the thin layer, so it will be thick enough by the time we've done the two coats. Okay, I think that's ready now to roll. So I don't like using too much flour, corn flour, as little as possible. Okay, a little bit on the pin. Okay, So we're going to roll a circle quickly as you can. What I like about this silicone gold is it's so flexible and stretchy. I think it's obviously been made with the Spanish climate in mind, but it's better than any other fondant I've used, and there's quite several on the market at the moment that I've tried. Okay. I think that's about enough now. Too much really, but I want to make it as thin as I can. If you can see the thinness, it's fairly thin. Okay, so now we're going to attach it to the cake. Just put it over the top. Now, first of all, place it into the interior by lifting it so that it all sits in there nicely. Now, as you know, fondant's very easy to work with, and this fondant is exceptionally easy to work with. It's very forgiving as well, so basically what you're needing to do is push the air out. So we're going from the top and we lift out and we push down so that all the air and all the creases. I'm afraid I can't do this back to front because I need to see what I'm doing, so I'll keep going back and forth for you just so that you can see what I'm doing. Basically just keep lifting the fondant out and pushing down. That way you're pushing all the air out. Quite quickly, quick as you can really, before it starts to dry. It's a bit tricky on the sides, so take a little bit more time to pull your fondant out and work it really well so that we don't get any creases. Although this is going to be covered, it's still not a good idea to have lots of creases underneath because it's not a good base to work on. So we need to okay, we're almost there. And if you remember, I didn't put too much ganache near the bottom of the cake because there's nothing worse than it all squelching out at the bottom. It ruins your cake when you put it on the board. Okay, we're almost finished. Okay, last little bit now. Now what's happened here on the top, I've got a slight bubble. So we're just going to need to using a scriber tool, which is the tool with the needle on the end. I'm just going to make a slight hole and it releases the air. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we just need to trim now, and I'm going to use my pizza wheel again. I find my pizza wheel invaluable for lots of different things. I never cut near to the cake to begin with. I usually allow about 1 centimetre around the bottom. because sometimes this fondant shrinks back, and if you cut it really close, it will shrink up the cake and it will spoil the look of the cake. So what I do is I push it in so that it's really into the bottom of the cake. It's quite a good little tip. And then you can cut it right to the cake then. Got a couple of little creases on this end, but as I say, it's not really a massive problem with this cake because we are actually going to be covering all of this, so you won't see it. It's really important to get the top layer correct though, so no pressure. Okay. You don't really need to use your smoother tool on this because, to be honest with you, it's pretty smooth, but I'm just going to give it the once over with my smoother tools just to... When I'm doing a cake like this, I always use two together. It's like making butter pats. Just give it a little go over, and that should eliminate most of the creases that were on this end as well, actually. There's just one there. Okay. A little bit on the top. And there we have it. This is what we call polishing. It's not necessary really with this because we're covering it. It's just habit, old habits die hard. Okay, so we've finished the basic stage. Now the next stage of the cake is to fill the top of the cake with the lining to make it look like the interior of the basket. And then we're going to put the basket weave and the painted material effect all over the basket. So for that reason, we need to roll some more of this cream, but we need to give it the basket textured effect using a texture mat. And alternatively, we're going to have alternate rows of basket material, basket material, basket material, and so forth. And the material rows, we're going to paint a design on it. I'm going to paint some flowers with just basic brush strokes because from a distance they'll look like flowers. But if you're not very artistic in that way, you can just put dots or crosses or a little swirly, squiggly line or something. It doesn't really matter. It's just to make it look like fabric. So we'll get on with that. So we need to roll two pieces of fondant now because I like to roll them at the same time. Get the cream ready and have the white ready, and then they have to be cut into equal strips. So for this I use a Stay Fresh mat because we're attaching one strip then the next strip, so you can't do one first and then the other. They both have to be there ready so that we can attach them alternatively. So we're going to start off by rolling out the cream and the white fondant now, ready to attach to the cake. Okay, we're ready to start decorating the cake now. Now, what I prefer to do is to decorate it to a certain level on the cake and then place it onto the correct board and complete it. That way it gives it a really nice neat finish at the bottom. If you completely decorate it on here, when you move it, there's a chance you could damage the bottom and it won't look so neat. So that's what I like to do. So to begin with, I'll show you what I'm going to use. I've got a texture mat here. I can't even remember where I bought it, to be honest. It's just got a bit of a texture. It's not basket weave, but it looks really good on this cake. If you haven't got anything like this, what I tend to do is I look around the house for different things. Obviously, you have to wash them really well first, but there's lots of things you can find that you can put texture on fondant with that might do the trick. If not, then you can always make a pattern using, you know, one of your fondant tools maybe, or something like that as an alternative. Also, we're going to use a Stay Fresh mat. This is basically because I need to cut 2 pieces of fondant, one cream and one white. They need to be kept moist while I'm attaching each piece to the cake. So it's a good idea to keep them moist using either a Stay Fresh mat. You can use polythene bags, and because I only brought one like a silly sausage, I need 2 really. Paul's loaned me, this is just a lace mat, but it does the same trick. It's like a silicone, so it'll keep the fondant fresh. So if you see me covering the fondant with one of these and you're wondering why I'm using a lace mat, that's the reason. Okay, so I'm going to begin now and roll out, first of all, the cream fondant. This has already been quite well moulded. I think I might just attach a little bit more. I don't want to run out halfway through. So we're going to roll this out and put the impression onto it and then cut it into strips. The strips need to be about, I would say, 1.5 centimetres wide. And they need, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to decorate one side, and I'm going to put the joins at the sides of the basket so it's nice and neat. So we'll be doing the front and the back separately. And then where the join is, we'll be covering that up with another piece just to finish it all off nice and neatly. It's quite a tedious part of the process, this one, so bear with me. Okay. Again, try and make your fondant quite thin. As I said before, it already has a thin coat of fondant, so we don't want a great big thick piece of fondant over the top of that. So when I'm rolling this, I try to keep it into pretty much a square shape, because obviously we're cutting strips, so it's easier if you can keep it into some sort of 4-sided shape. Now when you're finishing off a cake, it's always a good policy to polish your cake using your hands. Now, because obviously this isn't the finish of the cake, what I like to do is, before I do any impression or anything, is polish the fondant first, and that way it gets rid of any little imperfections and it gives it a really like glossy, smooth finish. I just want to make sure that we've got enough for both sides. There's nothing worse than almost getting there and then you have to re-roll, so that's why I'm making sure we've got quite a big piece rolled out. Okay, I think that's thin enough. That's very thin, if you can see that. I don't know if you can see how thin I've rolled that. Can't roll it too thin, because what will happen is it'll be too thin to take the pattern of the impression mat. So you need to watch that one. I'm cutting it into a reasonably 4-sided shape. And then using the textured mat, now you need to work out which way you want the pattern to go. Obviously I'm having it going across. So basically just place the mat on top of the fondant, and I use a rolling pin, and basically I just work the pattern into the fondant. And then you can peel it back and it leaves you with a really nice pattern. I'm going to go once more. Oops. This helps thin it out even more as well, which is quite good. Okay, so we've got a nice sheet there of fondant with a pattern. Now again, I'm just going to trim off where it hasn't imprinted the pattern because we don't need it this wide anyway. So we only want fondant with pattern on it, so there we go. Now it's quite easy to get straight lines on this because it actually it is a lined pattern, so we can use the pizza wheel and cut on the line. I tend to do it 3 deep, so follow the pattern 3 times and cut across neatly as you can. Sorry. It's quite subtle, this pattern, but it really does look good when it's finished. This is where we joined the 2 sheets, and I'm going to take that piece away because it's not imprinted very well on there. Okay, so let's... That was a bit wobbly there, so I've just adjusted slightly there. Okay, that's good now. Can start again. I'm just looking how many layers we have on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, there's about 13 layers on each side, which means we're probably going to be needing 12 of each, 12 of the plain and 12 of the pattern. So that's 2, 4, 6. There's roughly enough there, but I'm just going to make a couple of extra ones because we need to also attach a neat piece around the top to finish off the bag once we've filled it in with the lining. So I'm just going to make 2 or 3 more, and then we'll go on to make the white strips. I think we have, and then we also have to do the 2 strips up the side, but the strips that we're going to do up the sides to hide the joins, they're going to be thinner than these. They're going to be half the depth. So, but we can adjust them when we come to do that. I think we've got plenty there now to be working with. I'm just going to put these to one side and cover them. Actually, you might need to put them a bit further away while I roll the other piece out. Okay, so that's nice and safe, and that'll keep nice and moist. So I'm going to put this fondant away because obviously the longer you have it outside it dries up. So now we're going to roll out in the same way a piece of white. The reason that we're using the white as opposed to the cream is because we're painting the pattern on the white, and the material looks better if it's white with the pattern rather than cream. So we don't need any trim in the white because the trim is all going to be done in the cream basket effect. So we're literally going to need about 12 strips of the white. So here we go. Let's roll out the next 12 strips. Again, as well, it's important to polish it as well as you're going along, because you won't get the chance once it's on the cake. Because if you try to start polishing, you'll distort the impressions that you've made, and you'll distort the lines of the cake and all sorts. So it's always best to do it before if you're doing this sort of method on the cake. Oops. Right, we need it fairly thin, like we had the cream, so here we go. I think this is just about ready now. No, it's not, actually, a little bit more. Okay, that's the thinness we're looking for. It's fairly thin for fondant. It's almost as thin as you would use petal paste for a flower, actually. Okay, so if you remember what I did, I just made the square roughly the size of the sheet that we used, which is the perfect size for this cake. And then we need 12 strips, about the same depth as we used for the cream. So here we go. Four, 5, 6, 7, 12, and I'm just going to do a couple for good luck, just in case one gets a bit distorted or something. Okay. Again, really important to put your fondant away because it's so expensive, fondant. We don't want to waste any of it. Okay, so again, we put this to one side. And cover. Okay, so they're all ready to go on the cake. Before we attach the sides though, we must fill in the middle of the cake with the lining of the basket, which we are going to use pink, a nice baby pink, or fuchsia pink actually, rather than baby pink on this cake. So I just need to roll out a small amount of fuchsia pink. I'm just pop over to my desk and get the baby pink, fuchsia pink again, sorry. Okay, so here's my fuchsia pink. We don't need very much of this. We just need to roll a tiny little bit, and we need to attach it to the first layer of fondant using a little bit of water. You literally need a tiny amount of fondant for doing this little bit, but it really does make it look three-dimensional if you actually take the time to make the lining of the cake. It makes such a difference to the overall effect. Sorry, this is quite hard. I'm not used to being in such temperatures. Okay, we're getting there now. Really important to work your fondant. I can't stress that enough. It makes such a difference. You quite often see cakes with quite bad finishes, and I swear it's because they've not worked their fondant enough before they've rolled it. Okay, I think that's quite good now. So I'm just going to use a little bit of water. I'm just going to paint it onto the fondant on the inside of the top of the basket. Okay. You can paint the water slightly over the top as well of the rim, because we're going to neaten this off with the basket effect, so it'll finish it off really neatly. Okay. A little bubble still in there. I'm just going to pop that. There we go. So just quickly roll this little piece out. Again, like all the other bits we've rolled out, you want it to be as thin as possible. Nothing worse. Okay, now basically just measure slightly if that's big enough, and I'm just going to basically cut, I can only describe it as an elongated egg shape. So you want to end up with something similar to that shape. And then we're just going to place it on top of the cake. Fill in the middle with it. I've actually gone too far over to one side. Let me just put that on again. You're allowed to make the occasional mistake. It's okay. Okay, make sure there's no bubbles there. Now, obviously this is too long. What I find is quite handy on these occasions is a pair of scissors, rather than trying to get a knife on the top and then you dent your base work and whatnot. Okay, that doesn't need to be that neat, because I don't know if you can see that, but obviously we're going to trim this with the basket weave around the top, so you won't see this ugly edging. Okay, so we're now at the stage where we're going to decorate the sides of the cake, so that will be the next stage. Okay, we're now ready to attach the strips of fondant that we've previously cut to the cake. This is the bit where the cake starts to come alive, okay? So to begin with, we need to neaten the top of the cake. We need to cover all of this area here and make it look as if this actually is a lining. We're going to be using this tool. I call this my stitching tool. We're going to be using this a lot on this cake because we're also making the rag doll, and obviously that's a sewn doll, so we need to put lots of stitches everywhere. And to make the cake look more realistic, we're going to be stitching each panel to the cake, if you like. So this is really urgent for this cake. You must have this tool. If you haven't got one of these tools, there is another tool. Excuse me, I'll just hop along and get it. It's just an alternative if you haven't got this tool. Most people have this tool, which is, it's the smiley face tool. It's got the smiley face on one end and it's got like a zigzag on the other. Well, that's quite good for using as a stitcher as well if you don't have the wheel. Just an idea if you haven't got the wheel. Okay, we're going to start by using the cream fondant to go around the top of the cake. Now, if you remember, I said we were going to work in two halves of the cake, so it's always best to start on the half that's going to be the back of the cake, and that way, you know, if you make any errors, they're on the back. By the time you get to the front, you should be perfect. Okay, so we're going to use two halves, so we're going to work in two half circles. So each strip needs to be painted with water. You don't need, these strips are quite long actually for this cake, so I'm not going right to the ends. Now we need to make sure we actually cover the pink with this strip, and we're just going to the middle of the cake, and then we're going to use a very sharp craft knife, or scissors are good for this job as well, and cut it right in the centre, because then the piece on the front will join onto that. It's just to make the cake look neater. So we use the second one. I've gone a little bit on the low side here, so we're probably going to have to use two strips. I'm going to join it up to the previous piece. Cut it using your craft knife. Give it a nice neat join. Okay. And then I think we'll just need to go around one more time. So we may or may not need to roll some more cream. I'm just overlapping the previous one very, very slightly because all of these strips are going to be overlapping the previous one, so it's important that you get that detail right. Okay. And then you can just press it down, that's fine. Even though we made it a little bit wide, it will still look fine. There we go, we'll take the next one and go around the other side. You can paint the actual cake if you want. There's a little bit of fluff there. You can paint the cake with water if you prefer. I prefer to always paint the piece that I'm attaching to the cake because I feel as if I can control it better. Okay, that's looking good now. See, with a cake like this, a child's basket probably wouldn't be this wide, but quite frankly, if you make it any narrower, you won't have any cake to eat. So you need to use a little bit of artistic license. Okay, so now we've got the top finished. I don't know if you can see that. We're going to start the top of the basket with yet another piece of the cream, and then we're going to alternate with the white. So again, remember to just slightly overlap the previous piece. There we go. And because we've got all of these pieces ready, it's quite a fairly quick process to do this. We can do one side at a time, so oops, this is a little bit sticky. I think the lace mats are probably a better idea. Okay, so again, in the same fashion, just paint your strip and attach. Just slightly over the previous piece. And cut it down the centre, like so. Try not to get the pattern to go too wonky. Doesn't matter if it's slightly wonky. I think that looks quite authentic. But you don't want, for example, you don't want the lines to start going downwards. You need to keep them fairly reasonably straight. Okay. Now, when I do this method of a cake and I'm attaching it to a pre-prepared board, I've already explained to you earlier, I think, that I'll only go down almost to the base of the cake and we'll keep the last piece for when we attach it to the cake finally, and that will just give us our neat finish. Okay. I think we may run short of a couple of pieces of the cream actually, but which is what I wanted to avoid, but unfortunately sometimes these things happen when you least want them to. Okay, so this is progressing quite well now. Okay. White. Oops. Another reason for actually putting the water onto the piece that you're attaching is that you need the water to be all the way so that it actually attaches to the piece above it. If you just put water on the actual cake, you might miss those bits, and you don't really want watermarks all over your basket weave, really. I knew there was logic in my madness somewhere there. Okay, we're almost halfway there now, so... Oops. Okay. It's important you use a sharp knife when you're doing something like this. If it's not very sharp, it'll drag fondant, and you don't really want that to happen because it'll distort the finish that you want. Okay, that's fine. Okay, here we go. Actually, as you get down the basket, the pieces get longer because it gets slightly narrower, so you have bigger bits to cut off the ends. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that stage because I'd like to finish that off when it's actually on the actual board that we're going to present the cake on. So we need to do exactly the same process now on the reverse side of the bag. Okay, we're at the stage now where we're going to attach the cake to the actual board we're going to present the cake on. So I've brought over the board we prepared earlier, and basically we're just going to pop a tiny little smidgen of ganache onto the board where you want to place. So just pick the best view that you think the cake will look best at. There's a little squiggle here on the top of the board, so I'm going to cover that squiggle with the cake. I'm just going to place a little bit of ganache, not too much, because we don't want it all to squirt out underneath the cake. And then we're going to lift the cake. I'm just going to use my hands. You can use a cake lifter, you can do all sorts, but because the cake's not quite finished at the bottom, we're going to finally finish it on the cake. We've got the last two pieces to attach to the cake. It should be quite easy to lift on. Just make sure that you put the side that you want to the front of the cake and not get it the wrong way round. So actually that's my front. So I'm just going to lift the cake. I'm just going to slightly, because I already stuck this cake down with some ganache while I was decorating, so I'm just going to sort of loosen it first. And this is the exact reason, whoops, why I didn't want to, there we go, and take it and place it onto the cake board. Okay, so there we have the cake already in place. If you want to move it slightly, just move it slightly. I think that's fine there because we're actually going to attach the rag doll in front of the cake, so we need a fair bit of room there. So I think that looks quite good, good position. Okay, so the next stage for me is to just finally put the last strip around the bottom of the cake, and then we need to put one strip up that side and one strip up that side to hide the join. Okay, so I'll put that to one side. Now I already have the last three pieces are already pre-rolled out, as you know. So must be careful. Oops, where's my larger brush. Must be careful now at this point. We don't want to get water all over the board. So don't be too liberal with the water. I'm going to do the back first. And just literally put it to the bottom of the board. And that way you'll have a nice neat finish. Hopefully with no ganache bulging out at the bottom. Yeah, that's good. I'm so glad I changed the blade on my knife because it's so important to get a sharp knife for this sort of work. Okay, the last piece to go on the front. Oops. Okay, so that's quite neatly attached now to the board. Now the next stage is to just quickly, I did tell you earlier that we needed to have the pieces for up the sides. I wanted them slightly thinner. So with the one remaining piece, I'm just going to split it in half using the pizza wheel. And then we obviously don't need them to be that long, so I'm going to cut some off. And then attach one at a time. It's just so that it looks a little bit neater. So start from the bottom, go right to the board and then just up to the top. I'm not going right over the top into the inside of the basket. I'm just going to the top of where we started the basket from. I want to leave that like that. Okay, going right to the board. Oops. That's it. Okay, so there we go. The next stage, before we start painting, is to use this famous stitching wheel. Now what I would like to do is to put a line of stitches on the bottom of each strip rather, just all the way along, because all of these will be attached separately if the basket was made in the conventional way. So they need to be shown that they're all attached to the basket lining. So therefore we're going to stitch them in place. Make sure that those side strips have sealed down properly. So this is quite a quick process. It just gives that little bit more detail and makes it look more realistic. Okay. Got a row of stitches on each strip. You can use your turntable quite effectively for this, so you don't have to pause while you're doing the stitches. Just turn the table as you're going around with the wheel. Oops. Okay, we're almost there. Another couple. There we go. Actually, it doesn't matter if they're slightly skew-if, some of them, because To be honest, I think if you bought a basket for a child like this, they wouldn't be perfect. Then down the side panels that I've just done, I'm going to do a row of stitches as well. And around the top, the inside of the top, we're going to do a row of stitches as well, to show that that has been stitched to the lining. So turn your table as you go round. There we go. Didn't quite do it in one. There we go. So there's all your stitching effect. The next stage at this point is to paint the design of the flowers, or whichever design you decide, you know, is within your limits of painting. I know some people probably find it more difficult to do the flowers, but you know, you can easily make a pretty pattern with some spots or something similar. Okay, so I'm going to start painting the flowers now. It's not complicated, but I've decided to do a design which uses 5 different colours. We've got fuchsia pink and baby pink, that's for the roses. We have a green for the leaves. We've got a primrose yellow and an aqua blue just to make some little filler flowers. Now I'll move these things out of the way, what we don't need anymore. And what I do need are a couple of brushes, different sizes. I've got a 0 and a 1 and a 3, actually, that's fine. So I've got 3 different sizes. We're going to need water to wash the brush, which we have here. A little palette, something like this, or a plate if you haven't got a palette. And I'm using some gin. This is, you can get distilled alcohol to do this from sugarcraft suppliers, but I live in Spain and gin is very cheap, so I tend to use gin. The reason I use gin and not water is because gin obviously is an alcohol and it evaporates much quicker than water, so therefore it dries more quickly. So I'm just going to start the pattern off, and we're going to just repeat the pattern alternatively. So what I tend to do is I start with one flower and put the one flower all over the cake, and then I do the next flower all over the cake and so forth, so that we're not using all different colours at the same time. For this job I need to sit down, so I'm just going to pull the stool over. And we're going to need some paper towel just to dry the brush on. It's always useful to have when you're painting. Okay. Right, I'm going to start with the rose. And I can use the larger brush for doing the rose because it's the biggest flower on the design. I'm going to use the fuchsia pink first. Right, so I'm going to place some fuchsia pink in my palette. I'm going to what I tend to do is put some gin in the middle. Okay, I want you to be able to see what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm going to dip my brush in the gin just to... And basically, there's no big massive detail on this, it's just basically a few brush strokes. Now straight away I've gone and got paint on the basket weave. Try not to do that. I'm just going to make a few strokes to sort of resemble a rose, a bigger rose. Sorry, I've just managed to get straight away a little bit of the pink onto the basket weave. I'm just removing it using some water. There's a little bit too rough there. Okay, so I've sort of started the rows off. Now on the next row I'm going to put the rows in between where I've put the first one. You can see these are just sort of curls. It'll look more like a rose once we've put the other colour to it. So again, you can have a smaller one next to it or something. You can make your own pattern, you don't have to do the same design that I'm using. This is just quite random. And it looks probably nothing like a rose at this point in time, but once you get all the other colours and the design on, it will look more feasible as a rose, I think. This is for a little girl, remember, so we want it to be nice and brightly coloured. But you don't need to be a great artist to do anything like this. This is very sort of straightforward, literally brush strokes. To be careful at this point, you don't want to get paint all over the board or anything like that, so you don't want your brush to be too wet. Just as this resembles some kind of, I mean, I'm doing it fairly quickly, as you can see. I'm going to wash my brush thoroughly now, wipe it with the tissue, and then I'm going to use the paler pink, a little bit of the alcohol again. Just take the excess water that may be still lingering from washing the brush. You don't want a really wet brush on this cake. Now I'm going to go in between where I've done the fuchsia, just to give it a little bit more of a sort of three-dimensional rose effect. You could obviously spend more time than I'm spending now doing this, you know, to do it really perfect. If it was a showpiece or something like that, then I would spend more time. But, you know, to be honest with you, it's going to look pretty good when it's finished anyway. It doesn't need to have a master artist or anything doing these designs. Once we get the other colours in, the greens and the blues, you'll see it coming together. I've got a little bit there onto the basket weave, but I'm not too worried about that because the doll is going to be in front of that, so I'm not going to stress over something that can be hidden. Okay. Okay, so we finished the roses. Again, give your brush a good wash, but actually for the next one I'm going to use a smaller brush anyway. I'm going to use a number 1. I'm going to put some, I'll use the yellow first. Oops, that's previously not been washed correctly. Okay. I'm just going to make a squiggle with the yellow to make it look like a different flower. going as quickly as I can, just so that you can get this effect fairly quickly. Okay, we're almost there with the yellow. Doesn't need to take very long, this really, unless you want to spend hours and hours, but it could look just as good actually with a polka dot type of pattern. Okay. Now I'm going to use the blue. This is an aqua blue. It doesn't have to be this colour blue, but it goes quite nicely with the shade of the board. So, and all I'm going to do with the blue is literally put some little dots every so often randomly. We want to get the effect that this is actually material and it is a sort of continuous pattern, so we don't want to go too random, as in all over the place. Try and keep them. I'm doing 2 on each sort of set of flowers, one either side. If you can't fit 2 on, just doesn't really matter if you can't, but try and keep it sort of regular if you can. We're almost there. Once we've done the blue dots, all we need to do then is a little bit of green to represent a leaf in the design. Okay. I mean, this is, you don't need to be a great artist to have this effect, and I think it looks quite good when it's finished. Once this bag's finished now, the fun bit begins, because we attach the handles and the bows, and then we start working on the ragdoll. And that's, I find, the nicest bit. Okay, we're just about there with the blue. Okay, 5 more minutes, okay. We're just going to finally quickly put a little touch of green. I'm literally just doing a sort of a V sign with 2 strokes of green to represent leaves, just kind of randomly, but still to sort of make it look like it's a repetitive pattern, if you like. Okay, that's it. And that's the material effect in between, which, whoops, That's how you want it to look at the end. And then obviously we need to do the back side as well, the back of the cake. And then we'll be ready to do the next part, which is making the handles and attaching them, making the bow and attaching it, and then we'll be working on the ragdoll. Okay, so we've finally finished the painting on the material strips of the basket, and we're actually ready now to make all the accessories. So we've got several things we need to do. We need to make 2 handles, we need to make a bow for the front of the cake, and whilst I'm doing the accessories, the actual ragdoll has a bow in her hair, and she has buttons on her dress and on her shoes. So we're going to make all those things now. Plus, just to finish the cake off, we're going to make a bracelet. I don't know if you remember, probably lots of you are too young, but when I was a little girl, they used to have bracelets that you got from the sweet shop, and there were lots of little sweets on an elastic band, and we're going to make a bracelet similar that looks like that, and actually it will be edible. So we're going to make all those pieces now, then we will put them to one side to let them dry whilst we continue with the rest of the ragdoll. Okay, so number 1, we're going to make the handles for the basket. Okay, so we're going to need to use some wire for this. And we'll also need to use, these are posy picks. They're just like a conical plastic piece of, well, it's just basically to pop the wire in, because you're not meant to have the wire in the actual cake itself. So I'm going to use quite a firm wire. This is an 18 gauge wire, because it's going to hold quite a lot of weight of fondant. Now, we need to shape the wire into a horseshoe shape. Ideally something round. This is just a tea caddy, is perfect. If we just centre the wire around the caddy and then just shape the wire and then bring it in a little bit, because we don't, obviously we want the handle to be just in the middle of the bag, so something similar to that we need. So that's what I use that for. Now, it's a very simple method, this. I'm going to make a series of fondant balls. We're going to use fuchsia to match the lining of the handbag, of the basket. Again, like I told you before, earlier, we need to work the fondant really well before we start to roll it. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to, when we've worked the fondant enough, we're going to roll it into a long sausage shape, and then we're going to just use a knife and cut equal sized pieces. We need the balls to be roughly, I would say, the size of a Malteser. And then we're just literally going to thread them onto the wire. Now you may or you may not need to stick each one together using a little bit of water. It depends how hot your kitchen is or how sticky your fondant is. You might not need to, it might just stick together without using the water. It's better if you don't need to use water, because sometimes it can make the fondant really sticky and hard to work with. Okay. So I've worked this enough now. We're just going to roll it into a nice sausage. I'm not even using any flour, if you've noticed, any cornstarch. The temperature in here is really nice, so it's not sticky. Now I've worked it out that you roughly need 20 Malteser size balls for this handle. And don't forget, we're going to need 2 handles. So roughly we're going to need 40. Just going to get my knife. Okay, these are probably not exactly the same size. It doesn't actually matter if they're slightly different. Now we need to take the ball and we need to really work it between palms of our hands. One thing I hate on any cake is cracks in the fondant. So you need to really work it so that your ball is completely smooth like that, with absolutely no cracks at all in it. And then we're going to start and literally just thread it through the wire. Take it up to the top. And then it's probably easier if you actually make all your balls first and then just thread them all on together. So that's what I'm actually going to do, because I think that way it'll be faster. Now, because I've worked the fondant before I rolled it, it's quite easy to actually get them crease free. And if they're slightly different, don't worry, because it looks, I mean, these beads are never identical anyway, usually. Because this is what they're meant to represent. They're meant to represent beads. Okay, so, oh, that one's got a crack in it. Do that again. My hands are dreadful. They're covered in food colour. I have to have my nails short because it's impossible. I don't know how anyone can make a cake with long nails. So if I'm having a close-up right now of my hands, I apologise for the state that they're in. Okay. As I'm lining them up now, you can see they're pretty even. The idea is to thread the wire, but we need to leave roughly, I would say, 4 centimetres on either end in order to stick them into the cake. If you don't leave enough, if you only leave, for example, an inch or 2 centimetres, it won't be enough to steady the handle onto the cake because of the weight of the balls, so the handle will just fall off. You need to actually insert them quite deeply. Okay. Right, we're on to 12 now, so we've just got another 8 quickly to roll. And then we'll move on to making the bow once we've finished the handles. For the bow, moving on slightly, we're going to use the same colour as the balls. I think it will just bring out the inside of the cake and it will all blend in really nicely. But the bow, we're going to have to add a little bit of powder gum, just so as it sets a bit quicker. Because I don't think fondant will hold on its own. But we'll come to that shortly, once we've done these handles. There we go. It's a little bit small, that one, never mind. Okay, we're almost there. Just got one more to do. And we can thread them all. Because they're still all fairly soft, I don't think we're going to need to use much water at all. But I'm just going to grab my fine brush, not too big a brush, because we don't want to overload it with water. Just in case they don't stick, I'll just have a damp brush at hand. And it literally only needs to be damp. Okay, so we started off with the first one at the top. Basically, we're just going to thread these all together. Yeah, they're still wet. They're still wet enough to stick without any water at all, which is, I prefer that. myself. The least water that you have with fondant makes for an easier life, because to be honest, once your fondant starts getting sticky, it becomes a bit of a chore and things become more complicated. And I think it doesn't matter that they're not all absolutely identical. It's quite charming, actually. Possibly a little bit there. That's better. If you do need to use water, literally a damp brush, that's all you need. Not great big lots of water, it'll ruin it. Okay, you can see it building up now. A bit laborious this, but it's worth the effort. Okay. I mean, I say you need about approximately 20 for this size bag. That's probably about how many you need. It depends what size cake you do. You might need a few more, a few less. You just have to gauge it yourself. There we go. So I've got another 2 each on each side to go. Whoops, fingers and thumbs. Okay, and that's what we end up with. And obviously we're going to place one that side and one that side. So obviously I will get on and make the other one, and then we will go to the next part of the decoration. Okay, so we've completed the handles and attached them to the cake using the picks that I told you about. And the next job now is to make a bow to place on the front of the cake. And as I said earlier, we're going to make the buttons for the dress of the rag doll, and there's also a button on each shoe. And we're going to make a smaller version of the bow for her hair, and we're also going to make the components for the bracelet. The reason we're doing this at this stage is because we need to put them aside to dry before we can use them. So whilst we're making the rest of the rag doll, they can be drying and we can attach them all later when they're dry. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is make the buttons. Now I have a little mould here that I'm going to use for my buttons, but you can easily, if you don't have a button mould, you can just basically cut small circles. For example, I'm just showing you a way of making a button if you don't have the mould, because it's so frustrating if you don't have all the tools that you need. But you can just make a small button quite simply. Just use the end of your a paintbrush. Let me see if I can show you that, and you can just do something very simple. Maybe put another circle around it to make it more realistic, using the end of a nozzle or something like that. So just so that if you don't have this, you can make them by hand, no problem. Okay, well, I'm going to use the mould, and I'm going to use the smallest button that I have with the 4 holes in the middle. It looks the cutest. And all you have to do is make sure that you have a little bit of cornstarch, not too much, because if you put too much, it's so non-stick that it comes out on your finger before it's the pattern is impressed into it. So just a little tiny bit. We're going to need 2 buttons for the dress and 2 buttons for the shoes. So 4 in total, and it's very, very simple. You just need the smallest little piece. What's important when you're using a mould is that you make sure that it's crease free before it goes into the mould. If it has creases in it, it will still be in it when it comes out of the mould, and it'll look pretty amateur and unimpressive. So we're going to stick that into there. Press it right in nicely, and then using a knife, which that's perfect. We just need to, using a sawing action across the mould, take the excess away, and basically it should be sticky enough to come out on your finger. Sod's law, but it doesn't. So there we go. One cute little button. Which is what we're aiming for. And basically we need to make 4 of those and put them to one side to dry. It's quite fine to use fondant. If it dries for half an hour or so, it'll be hard enough to attach to the cake. So that's the buttons sorted out. The next bit that I'd like to do is to make a bow for the front of the cake. Now, to make the bow for the front of the cake, I'm going to cut it out by hand. I don't have a large bow cutter. For the hair, though, on the other hand, I do have a bow cutter, which I'm going to use. So basically, what I'm going to do for the large bow is to make a very similar shape to this. And then basically it'll be a similar bow, but they don't make bow cutters larger than this in this FMM make. So I'm just going to cut it by hand. Now I will need to add to my fondant some gum, because I don't think the fondant will hold the shape of the bow as well as, for example, the little buttons, because it needs to be hollowed out and it's not going to hold its shape as well. So we need to add some gum. I'm going to use some Tylo powder today. You don't need very much at all. I'm just going to add probably about less than a teaspoon. That will just give it the extra sturdiness that it needs to hold its shape, the strength. I'm just kneading it in really well so that it's thoroughly mixed, and then we can roll it out once it's all mixed in. Okay. So this has to be very thin as well, so the gum also helps you to be able to roll it thinner than you would normally be able to roll fondant. Although having said that, this fondant that I use, the silicone gold, is amazing. You can roll it almost as thin as petal paste anyway, even without adding the gum. But I think you'll find that's not the case with most of the fondants you can buy over here. I think you'll need the extra powder to enable you to do that. you can see that's fairly thin fondant. First of all, I'm going to make the one that I'm using the cutter for the hair on the ragdoll. Now, before I go any further, I brought with me a piece of sponge. I'm just going to cut some little pieces of the sponge so that we can use them to go inside the bow to make the form of the bow until it dries. It's really handy to use the sponge. You can use tissue or something like that, but I prefer to use sponge. Right, cut your shape so that it's nice and clean on the back. There we go. We're not going to require the tails of the bow on this occasion, so we can discard those. All we need is the main part of the bow and the little bit that goes around the middle. Now, turning it over so that you've got the inside bit on the inside, I'm just going to put a tiny little tad of water in the middle. Again, be really sparing with your water when you're using fondant, and basically curl each side into the centre. And then again, with the tiniest amount of water, just completely cover the central piece. Place it over the bow and then tuck it behind, like so. And this is what the sponge is for. We're going to insert one in either side. I might have to trim them down a little bit more, because it is quite a small bow. There we go, that's better. And just place one in each end. And that will help it hold its shape until it's dry. So again, we're going to place that on a piece of sponge to dry, and that's going in the doll's hair. Now, with the rest of the fondant, actually I'm going to re-roll it because I've left a rather unusual shape to make a larger bow, so I'll re-roll this piece, and then we can just make a similar shape. Sorry, I didn't need that enough. Okay, that's better. I'll just use a tiny little bit more flour. Really, we want a long sort of strip of ribbon. I don't want to make the bow too large to go on the front of the handbag, but it needs to be considerably bigger than the one we've just made for the hair. So okay, that should do it. So we've got our long strip. So using this cutter as a guide for the shape, use your pizza wheel. And basically copy the shape. It's actually sort of almost octagon shaped, I think, 8-sided. Is that an octagon? I'm just going to finish it off using my my craft knife. I think that side's longer than the other side, so I'm just going to roll that slightly. That's it. They need to be equal. Okay, that's not very tidy. Just cut that again. I still feel as if that needs to be slightly longer. I'm just going to roll it again, and that's even better actually, because it makes the bow actually thinner. And then basically the same, turn it over, put your little tiny amount of water in the middle. Fold it into the centre the same way that we did before. And then we need to use some of the fondant that we discarded to make the central ribbon for the middle. And just because I've cut this by hand, I'm just trimming where it's not being cut evenly, just so that it looks neat. There we go, that's better. Okay, that's fine now. And now we will cover this in water. Exactly the same as we did earlier. And then another couple of pieces of sponge to go in the middle. You might need your paintbrush to open up the ribbon, the bow rather. And put one in either end. Oops. There we go. And the other side the same. There are lots of ways of making bows, but that's quite simple if you've got the cutter, because you can just follow the pattern of the cutter. Just going to trim again. You might need to trim a couple of times until you get the exact right shape. You don't want it to look uneven. That's it. There we go. And then again we set that aside to dry with the small one on the sponge. And later when it's dry, we'll attach it to the handbag, to the basket. Okay, excellent. Now, the last preparation we have to do is the bracelet, which is going to be the sweetie bracelet that I explained to you earlier. Again, it's very, very simple. We're just going to make a series of sausages, very tiny sausages, thinner than my little finger, and just cut several slices and just make like beads, similar to how we made the handles on the bag. And in order to finish the bracelet, what we'll need to do, using a circle cutter, we can imprint onto the board where we actually want it to go, and that way you can use this mark as your template for your bracelet. Otherwise it might be not a very good shape. We're not actually going to attach it yet. I'm just going to show you how to make the little beads, and then later, once the doll is in position, we'll stick the beads will all be dry by then. We can stick them all on the circle that we've prepared. So I'll just go ahead and I can show you how to make the beads using some of this pink. We're going to make the beads multicoloured. You can use any of the colours that's in the handbag. We could use yellow, pinks, blues, purples, oranges, make it nice and bright. So here we go. Again, it's exactly the same technique as we used for the handles, but we were just making much smaller sausages and much smaller pieces for the beads. So basically just little beads like this. We don't need that many. Probably if you did about 5 or 6 of each colour, that will be plenty. And I'm just going to squash them down and sort of roll them between my thumb and my forefinger. My first finger or my forefinger, I can't remember. And we're just going to make little tiny beads like this, and we're going to set them aside to dry, and then later on we can assemble them on the template that we've made. So that's the bracelet. The only other thing that we've got to do with the bracelet, I made a little heart-shaped charm, which just adds a little bit of detail to the cake, and basically that is just rolling out thin fondant and cutting out a heart with a heart-shaped cutter, which we're going to add to the bracelet when we finish. So the next stage of the cake is to prepare the ragdoll. Okay, well, it's more or less the final stage of the cake now. We're going to make the ragdoll. Basically, the ragdoll consists of a sponge, a Madeira body. The actual body is made from cake. The legs and the arms are just fondant. And for the head, we're going to use a styrofoam ball. Simply because styrofoam is very light, and we're going to have the head slightly bent forward. So it's much safer to use something like this. A big ball of fondant would be too heavy, and it might weigh down on the body and crush the body, or it might fall off. So I prefer to use things like this when we're doing quite a big head, which that is really. Okay, so we're going to start by carving the body. Basically, it's quite a small cake. We're just going to make a conical shape out of the sponge. Again, we were unable this morning to get a 4-inch round cake. This is a 6-inch round, so it is too big actually. But again, what we're going to do, we're going to put the excess to one side and possibly use it, you know, for another cake or whatever. So I'm going to start by slicing the cake. Into a sort of we can start from this type of shape. Want it to be round really, so it's not going to be actually a pyramid as such. It's more of a cone shape that I'm looking for. Obviously, when you come to do this cake yourself, unless you're going to make a huge bag, then obviously use a smaller cake. Then you won't have to cut away quite as much cake. Sorry, if you can see what I'm doing here. We're getting there, slowly but surely. Obviously the cake can't be too large because we have to bear in mind how big the head is. That looks slightly ridiculous right at this minute. It's much too big, the body. So, cut some height off there as well. We're sort of almost there now. It seems such a shame to cut that cake into this sort of size, but there you go. I would recommend that you used a 4-inch round for this cake. It's plenty big enough. And with the 4-inch round, basically that is more or less a 4-inch round now that I've got there. There really isn't much carving to do. You just literally take a little bit off the cake. Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good shape now. Because it's Madeira, you can sort of fiddle with the sponge a little bit because it's got that type of texture. Okay, I'm quite happy with that shape now. That's the shape we need to end up with, and you can see the head is much more in proportion to the body. Oops, put that to one side for a minute. Okay, the next stage is to ganache the body of the ragdoll. I'm going to do it again on a separate board. And basically, because it's such a small cake, I'm just going to cut it once and fill it once. So before you move it, always mark it. That's really important, because obviously that's quite, you know, it's not completely even all the way round, and if you take it off and it's unmarked, then you'd be putting it back the wrong place. It won't sit right. So I'm going to just put a little bit of ganache in the middle, not too much because it will make it too slidey, and then match up where I made my mark and basically cover it with the ganache. Use the same principle. I always use this principle. Don't put too much near the base of the cake, whether it's buttercream, ganache, whatever it is you're using. If the board is to be ice, that is, because it will seep out and it will look untidy and make a mess of your board. So there's no need to put lashings and lashings on. There we go. I'm not going to attach this to this board, there's no need. It's quite a small cake and it's quite... There we go. That's all we need. Okay. Okay, we're going to move on now to making the legs of the ragdoll and the arms of the ragdoll. Now they are not made out of sponge. It's your option. If you wanted to use the sponge and cover the sponge, then that's up to you. Personally, for me, they're quite small, and I think that they look more effective if they're just a solid block of fondant, to be honest. So I'm just going to push this to one side right now. I'll just wipe my top down, and then I'll show you how we make the legs. Just get rid of these crumbs. The last thing you want is crumbs in your fondant. There we go. Okay. Now, I've pre-prepared, again in Spain, they're not very good at having great varieties of colours in fondant, so I've had to pre-prepare it. I've used skin tone, I've used the Sugar Flare skin tone colour to prepare the legs. Again, we're going to use a very basic, simple technique. Again, we're making a sausage. This time it's going to be a bigger sausage and a wider one. Again, we need to start off by working our fondant. Okay, so we'll just work the fondant till it's nice and supple. I've used probably about 100 grams here, I think, of fondant for the legs, and you'll probably need about 75 for the arms, or maybe 50 actually, about 150 in total. Right, so that's nice and supple. I'm just going to roll it out now. We want the legs to be, you know, a decent size. I would say that's about the right size. Actually, the width of a real sausage is probably a good guide. Now, the way I do it is I just make it into a U shape, and then decide how long I want the legs to be, and just turn up the ends for the feet. Now you don't have to worry too much because there's lots of creases in that foot, and I've just been telling you all afternoon you don't want creases in your cake. But it's not a problem with the feet because we're going to cover them with a shoe. So you don't have to be too pedantic about that. Just need to cut that so it's the same length as the other side. So what we're aiming for are 2 legs and a turned up foot. Basically quite a basic, simple shape. Now you don't really need to worry about the ankles or the feet too much at this point, because they are completely going to be covered with some little socks and a little shoe. But you just need to make sure that they're pretty equal in size. And that one isn't, because that's quite a lot bigger actually. I'm just going to take a little bit away there. And continue to just work it as long as it's, as long as the legs are smooth and they're crease free. Don't worry too much about the feet at this stage. Okay. So we want to end up with something like that. Now, we're going to make the shoes. Now for the shoes, we're going to use fuchsia pink again. We're following through with the fuchsia colour. We don't need very much for the shoes. Just putting this away because it's such a shame to waste it, and if you leave it out it just wastes. And we're going to need a little bit of white for the socks. Not very much at all. We're going to need some water, a little brush, and we're going to need some circle cutters. So I have a set of 3 circle cutters here, and we're going to use those. We're also going to need our stitcher, and we will need our pizza wheel for doing this little job. Okay, so I'm going to start by doing the socks. It's no good putting the shoes on without the socks. Okay, so it's a good idea at this stage actually to just put a little bit of cornstarch down so that these legs don't stick to the worktop while you're working on the feet. So there we go. So I'm going to use a smaller rolling pin because it's just a tiny little bit we need here. Don't need that big rolling pin for this. Again, if you notice, I'm rolling the paste quite thinly, the fondant rather. I think I'm going to use the medium cutter for the socks. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the basic simple circle. I'm going to cut the end, one end off. What I'm doing with this paste, or fondant rather, is stretching it so that it looks more like an oval shape than a round. I'm just going to slice the top off, like so. And then using the water, I'm just going to paint a little bit of water up the ankle and across the foot. There we go. And basically just place the sock all around the foot like that. Don't need to worry about the base of the foot because the sole of the shoe will cover that. Okay, so we've attached the socks to the feet. Now the next stage is to make the shoes. And again, it's such a basic, simple way of doing them. We're just using circle cutters and our stitcher. So first of all, we need to make the soles of the shoes. So I'm just going to put a little bit of corn flour on the top. I don't like working with lots of flour. It just, especially when you're using a dark colour, it tends to discolour the fondant, and it's devil to get it off. Okay, so we just need 2 soles of the shoes. I'm rolling it slightly thicker for the soles of the shoes. I'm going to use this round cutter here, and we're going to cut the base off that's going to be level with the board. So there's number 1 and there's number 2. And I'm going to cut the base off. So we end up with a sort of archway, tunnel mouth shape. Now we need to obviously put some water on the base of the feet. You can be quite liberal with this. I mean, not excessively, but you know, you need enough because it won't stick, because it's quite thick, this one as well, so the weight of it, if you don't put enough on, it will just come off. Now these are probably too wide at the moment, so I'm just going to sort of gently manipulate them to make them a little bit thinner. And the same with that one, I'm going to make that a little bit thinner as well. Okay. So there we have the base of the shoe. Now the final stage of the shoe is to make the top of the shoe. I think I'm going to need slightly more paste for this. Once we've finished the shoes, then we can attach the legs to the cake board where the basket is, and then we can start working on the dress. Because I've just added that from the packet to the piece, that's what you really need to make sure you work it in well, otherwise you get all these weird sort of marks on the fondant and it doesn't look good. Okay, using a small amount of sugar starch, cornstarch rather. You can roll the tops of the shoe slightly thinner than the base of the shoe. I'm going to do one at a time. I'm going to cut a circle, the medium circle. I'm going to stretch it again so that it looks like an oval. And then using the smaller circle, I'm going to cut a little bit out of the top so as it looks like a smiley face. And then basically we're going to cover the back with water. Be careful, don't overdo it with the water, but you do need to put plenty on, or else it could come undone. Okay, now before I attach that, you have to excuse me, I'm going to have to face the shoe in front of me. I can't do it backwards, I'm afraid. We want to put what we're doing is we're joining the end of this circle to the base of the shoe. If you lift it up slightly, you can just tuck it behind. Nice neat finish. Okay. I'm just going to do the next one. And then all we have to do is the strap going across the ankle, and we need to make some stitching marks on the legs to make it look as if it has actually literally been sewn together, which after all that's what a ragdoll is. It's just made out of material sewn together. Okay. Again, using the medium circle, stretch it slightly so as it becomes an oval. Or if you've got an oval cutter in the first place, then you can use an oval cutter, but I don't have one, so. Okay, again, cover the back with water. I'm going to try and do it so that you can see what I'm doing there. We're just literally lining up to the bottom of the shoe. Try and do it as neatly as you can, and then lift it up and tuck it under. It needs to come to the end like so. Okay, so now we are at this stage. In the next lesson I'll show you how to make the straps to go over the ankle with the little button. I'll show you how to stitch the legs, we'll make the arms, and we'll finish the dress. Okay, so we're now at the stage where we've fitted the shoes, so we need to finish the shoes off. Now, in order to make them look very ragdollish, we're going to use the stitching tool, and we're going to put a nice line of stitches around the base of the shoe. If you hold on to it quite tightly, you can get a nice firm pattern into the fondant. So we'll go right the way around, so we have one there, and then we're going to again make a nice stitching line around the top of the shoe. And ragdolls always have a seam on either side of the leg, so we're going to go from the bottom of the shoe all the way up the leg, across the socks, and all the way up the leg. There we go. And then the next stage is to put the little straps onto the shoes. Again, it's very simple and straightforward. We just need two. This has been well manipulated, this fondant, so I don't have to go too mad. We just need two little strips, and we can then attach the buttons that we've already made earlier. Okay, so we'll just use a small rolling pin. Literally quite thin, you don't need to make it too thick. That's fine. Again, we're using the pizza wheel. I'm just going to cut two straps about, I would say, less than an inch wide, less than a centimetre wide, sorry. I'm not going to cut them to the exact size yet. I'll do that once they're on the foot. But I'm going to make a nice little stitch mark either side of the ribbon. So if you hold it into place, try not to let it move, because the line will go all higgledy-piggledy if you do that. There we go. And one on the end, like so. Now obviously the buttons are always on the outside of the shoe, so we just need to use a tiny little bit of water again. And I'm going to go at the top of the shoe and go right the way across to the other side, and when I know that there's enough there, I'm just going to snip it with the scissors. And exactly the same for the other side. And then we'll cover the ends with the buttons that I've already prepared earlier. It's just like Blue Peter, this is. Okay, just a little bit of water. And then we have the shoes finished. Okay, now it's time to attach them to the actual board of the cake that we're going to display the cake on. So I'm going to put the cake onto the turntable. We're going to have to work from the turntable now, so. Okay, there we go. So we need to allow enough room for the arm and the head. The head is going to lean against the cake, but we need to make sure we leave enough space for the arm on that side. It's a bit of a tricky one. That's the only tricky bit of the cake really, is that arm. Okay, so I'm sorry I have to face this forward, but I'm now going to attach the legs to the top of the cake board. And just to put it into place, I'm just going to put a little bit of water under each leg. That's all it needs. Okay. Now, before I go on to the dress, which we're going to work on in just a second, I'm just going to make the arms and put them to one side. It's quite useful to make them at this stage because we have the body here, so we can gauge the size better. Again, it's as simple as making a sausage, but slightly smaller, obviously, than the legs and shorter. I think that's plenty. And they're quite a crude, basic design, really. There's no complicated hands or anything to make. It's just basically a sausage with a bit of a curl on the end to represent the hand. Okay, we have to make sure that the arms are not too thick because they can be heavy on the dress, and we don't want them to pull the fondant of the dress down either. So I would say half the thickness of the leg. So if you can see that there, it's just about half the thickness. So we can make them equal sizes to begin with, that would help. Now, if we can just sort of see, now that's way too long at the moment. So I think we need to take about 2 centimetres off those arms. Yeah, that's much more sensible. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so we can re-roll them. And just using your fingers and thumb at the end, we're going to make, I can only describe it as how to describe it really. I'm just pressing with some pressure on one side so that the actual arm ends up thinner on one end, so that we have a sort of hand effect. And we need to make the same on the other side. I really don't know how to describe that. It's just pressing using your thumb and your forefinger to sort of make a sort of spade-like, shovel-like end, which is going to represent the hands. And we just need to make sure that they're both exactly the same size. And then what we're going to do is use our wheel again and come all the way down the front like that. So we end up with 2 arms like this. Now I can just put those to one side for a moment. And now we're going to make the dress. First of all, before we make the dress, we need to add the frilly underskirt. To make the underskirt, I'm just going to basically place the underskirt over the top of the legs, and then I'm going to put the actual piece of sponge on top, and then we're going to continue with the underskirt, just a couple of more layers, and then we will just put the dress over the top. I'm not going to put it on here separately, it's going to go on when it's on the cake. So first of all we'll do the frilly underskirt. Now I'm going to use a traditional garret frill cutter here. Everyone's familiar with one of these, I think. This is a really old one. It's just going to be white, and we're going to use, you can use a cocktail stick or any type of tool that you may have that you can just roll and frill up the frill. I'm going to add a little bit of Tylo powder to this, just to give it that little extra bit of flexibility in the paste to make it frill more. So I'm going to give it a good knead again. I'm going to add about, oops, that's much too much. That's about 3/4 of a teaspoon, I think, there. No more than a teaspoon. It'll have the effect of a gum paste, which means you can work with it, you can make it thinner and it looks more realistic, like a frill when you frill it up. I can't stand to see clumpy frills that are really thick, it looks dreadful. Okay, I'm going to need some cornstarch for this. I'm probably going to need to cut about 6 of these, 6 garret frills, because I want it to be really frilly under the dress. The dress is quite simple, so it really has a nice effect if it's got the frills underneath. Okay, so we need to roll this very thinly. Got a couple of bits of fluff in here, I don't know where they're coming from. That's lovely, nice and thin. Give it a nice firm cut. I think this was the very first thing I ever learnt to do when I learnt to make cakes, was to do a garret frill. It's quite old school now, we don't use them very often, but they're ideal in this context to make the frilly skirt. Okay, I'm just going to quickly re-roll that and just make an extra couple to make sure I have plenty. And I'm actually just going to nip over here and get my Stay Fresh mat. To make sure that they stay fresh, basically. I don't know if you can see on the film what a dream this fondant is to work with. It's just amazing. Okay, so if I just do one more and I'll start working on this one first. Okay. Now for this stage of the game, we need to use little pieces of sponge to help us keep the frill in position while it dries. It doesn't take very long to dry, But I find if you use tiny little pieces of sponge, it really helps keep the frill from just sort of like laying flat, if you like, and it just doesn't have any sort of dimension to it. Okay, so I've just got a few little bits there, and I've actually brought along a pair of tweezers because you do need to get the tweezers to take them out once it's dry, otherwise you're in danger with big hands of messing up the cake. Okay, I'm going to use my little frilling stick, I call this. You need to put a little bit of cornstarch again for this, otherwise it might stick. Okay. So if you don't know how to do a garret frill, basically, you just use your little cocktail stick or whatever you have at hand that's the end of a paintbrush, whatever, and just roll backwards and forwards until it springs up like a frill. Okay, there's one. I'm going to do 2 or 3 together because otherwise you have to stop off all the time while you do the next one. It's quite quick, really. I'll just do 3 for now. It's no good skimping on the frills because that's what's going to give the ragdoll the life that it needs. You need to have the dress nice and fluffy with lots of frills and it'll look really nice. Okay, just going to use the wheel to split them all. Okay, so we're going to start off by putting the first frill over the legs. Just test it before you attach it and see how you actually want it to look. So I'm going to sort of turn it around so that we've got it going around the dress, if you see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to attach the water so that we can firmly put it in position. Okay, so we just need some water at the top of the frill, nowhere else. Just going to put one around the back. Okay, now we're going to use some of these pieces of sponge that I've cut just to lift the frill up so that we can have the really frilly effect. Just going to put a couple of pieces just to give it that. Otherwise it will just fall flat and we don't want that to happen. Just we can get these out later. Actually, make sure that goes under there. Perfect. You can see how it's all frilled up now, and the same applies at the front of the dress. I'm just going to put a piece there at the front to hold it up so that it's not flat on the floor. That's it. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to give it one more layer, then we're going to put the dress on. So that's the start. So we're going to go over it with this one now. Again, just attach the smallest amount of water. Make sure you've got plenty of bits of sponge to actually lift this frill up from the next frill. I'm going in slightly. I'm not doing it at exactly the same level. otherwise you won't get that lovely three-dimensional effect. Put that there like that, and then we're just going to again lift just in odd places. I'm going to have to twizzle the board around just one moment while I do this, otherwise I can't see what I'm doing. Sorry about this, guys. I'll show you now. Now it's essential, now you've put all these bits of sponge, that you can get them out. That's why I advise you to use a pair of tweezers. Okay, so we've started off the underskirt by placing it on the board. The next step in the next stage of the dress is to attach the sponge to the cake and finish the remainder of the dress off. Okay. So we've started off, as I said, the 2 layers of the petticoat. Now we're going to attach the body of the ragdoll, and we're just going to probably add 1 more layer of frill, possibly 2, I'll see how it goes. And then we're going to make the dress. And then obviously we already have the arms made. And then finally we'll just finish off with the head and put the decorations on, and we're finished. Okay, so in order to attach the body, I'm just going to use a small amount of ganache. Literally put it over the frill. And then we're going to attach the body. Just going to use my palette knife. I didn't stick this to the board, so it's quite simple. Just bear with me. Okay. Let's stick that to the frill. We definitely need now, I would say 2 frills to go on top of there. So at that stage we're at now. I'm just going to wash my hands. I've managed to get ganache all over them. Okay. So we're going to continue with the frills, which I've already prepared earlier. I'm just going to finish frilling them. So I think if you can safely say you're going to need 6 of these frills to complete the job. Okay, but as you can see, they're pretty quick and easy to make. Just continue around till you finish each one. Okay, and then we'll do the final one. Got a little bit here as well. I might be short of some sponge. I might have to cut a few extra pieces of sponge. That's not a problem though. This is the most sort of time consuming and complicated bit actually. We shouldn't actually need to put any water on the frill now. It will just stick automatically to the ganache. So just put one round the back. Sorry, it's not very easy for you to see this bit, but basically all I'm doing is attaching to the ganache. Now I need to tuck that round at the back, so just use a stick or a paintbrush or something of that nature. And we need to continue to lift these frills, so we need to use our little pieces of sponge that we prepared. Oops. If you don't have the frills lifted up, it's just going to look nothing. So you really do need to make an effort with your pieces of sponge. There we go. Just need to cut a few more pieces actually. It is a bit of a fiddly job this, but it is worth the effort when it's finished, because it just looks so much more realistic. Okay, I'm going to use this bit now to go all the way around. And this is what helps lift the dress out as well. If you've got your frill nice and sort of frilly, the dress won't just lay flat, if you like. It will stand out more. Now that needs just to be pushed down a little bit. That's it. Okay, we're just about there now. We can actually start working on the dress. I think that's going to be sufficient frills actually. So in total we used 5, not 6. There we go. So it just looks rather weird at the moment with all the little bits of sponge sticking out, but once they're all removed, it will keep the there we go. I'm not going to lift the frill up too much at the back. I'm actually just going to fit this last bit on here, because at the back of the dress I don't think it would be too lifted up, because it's where she's sitting down. We go. Okay, so we're at the stage where we need to actually make the main part of the dress now, which is very, very simple. The colour that I've chosen for the dress is actually pale pink. Again, they're all simple, basic skills. It's just rolling out and cutting a circle for the dress. Again, remember your basic rule and work your paste well before you roll it. That's all I can advise. Because if you don't do that, then you will get a dreadful finish. Can't emphasise that enough. Okay. Now, you could, if you wanted to, add a little bit of powder to this to give it a little bit more sort of you know, you can manipulate the paste a little bit better when it's got the powder in, but actually I think I'm not going to do it on this occasion. Depends on the paste that you're using. This paste feels really good, so I don't think it's necessary. But if you haven't got such a good paste, if you've got a very soft paste, just add a little bit of powder to it. It will give it that extra strength to be pulled around a little bit. This is very elastic anyway. Okay, so all it is a circle. Roughly I would say about a 7-inch circle. I don't know how much that is in centimetres, I'm afraid. What I normally use for doing this is a cake drum. It gives you a nice, a good shape for the circle. Or you could use a plate, you know, something similar to that. This is a 6-inch sponge pad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use that and just cut about 1/2 inch around that to give me the 7 inches. Okay. Now, just to make the dress a little bit more interesting, I'm going to use some white, and I'm just going to trim around the base of the dress with some white. All I need for this is a thin sausage, and we'll just roll it out, and we're going to put some stitching details on this trim on the dress, just a little extra detail. And we're going to make the collar of the dress white to match the hem. So basically just a nice thin strip. Make sure you've made it long enough. And then just with a steady hand, we're going to cut a thin probably about 3/4 of a centimetre, the same width that we used for the straps on the shoes is about the right size. Doesn't have to be perfect. I think this is going to be too long, but I'd rather have too much than have to join it. So again, we're going to use our famous stitcher, and I'm going to put two edges with the stitching, like I did with the straps. And it just really finishes the dress off quite prettily. Hold the strip steady, because if you don't, it goes off in different shapes and then the stitching all goes kaput. So try to... There we go. I think we've almost got enough now, actually. Just go a little bit extra. Just in case. I think that should be enough now. Okay, so now we have that ready, we just need to again use a little bit of water, just paint it round the edge of the skirt. It's probably better to paint the water on this time rather than paint it on the strip, because it's such a long strip. It would be more difficult to manage if you were holding it when it was wet. So I would advise that you did it the opposite way round on this occasion. Okay, so we start somewhere. Just place it all the way around the edge of the dress. You can go slightly off the circle, just so that it's edged in white and you can't see the pink underneath. Now what we need to do is make sure that that join is at the back of the cake, of the back of the dress rather. And basically all we're going to do now is lift this and put it on top of the cone. We need to make sure that the join is at the back, first of all. And then we need to, what we want to do is have like a folded effect. So we're just going to try and fold this in little folds all the way around. Turn the fold inwards where the join is so that you can't see it. I think that's fine. So we have that sort of effect when it's finished. Now the next stage is to make the collar of the dress. We're going to use white again. Again, another very simple procedure. I am going to, however, need my crimping tool, which I'll just have to run over there and find. One moment. So again, just using a very basic cutter, I'm going to use my smallest round cutter for the collar. We just cut a circle, and out of the front of the circle, using my craft knife, I'm going to cut a V shape, like so. And then I'm just going to sort of, using my hands, make it look rounded, so as it's like the lapels of a blouse or a dress. Just got a bit of black fluff there again. I'll turn it over and use the other side. There we go, that's better. Okay, what I'm going to do now is use my crimping tool. I don't know whether anyone's ever learned how to crimp, but I'll just give you a quick demonstration. Basically, you just hold your crimping tool and you squeeze together the fondant, and it just gives you a lovely pattern. And it's perfect for edging the collar of the dress. So I'm going to start in the V and then just basically work my way round. You won't really see the back of the collar because the hair of the doll will cover it. It's just really the front we're interested in. So basically it ends up like this, and we're just going to attach that with a small amount of water. I'm going to put it more forward than central so that we can actually see that, because once the head's on it will hide most of the back of it anyway, but we end up with something like this. And then with the pre-prepared buttons, we're going to add 2 buttons to the dress just to finish that bit off. Again, we're going to attach with water. I have one. Make sure your buttons are lined up straight and they're not all skew whiff. And if there's any cornstarch anywhere, just wipe it off with a brush. Okay, so now we're at the stage where we've finished the dress. The only remaining thing to do is to add the arms and the sleeves of the dress and the head, and then obviously finish off the bracelet, and then we're finished. Okay, we're in the final stages now. We're just going to prepare the sleeves for the dress and attach the arms, and then finally we'll be attaching the head. And then all that will be left to do is the little accessories and the bracelet and things like that, and then we're finished. So the sleeves are very simply a circle, the medium-sized circle. Before I do anything with the sleeves, I'm going to, it's a little bit jaggedy that, so I'm just going to make sure it's nice clean finish. And then we're going to use the stitcher again and just stitch all the way around the circle. Okay, so we're not going to actually use the whole of the circle. We're going to cut a little slice of cake out of the circle, if you like. And then basically we're going to sort of end up with that sort of shape, and the arm will go inside. So we can join that together. Take care not to press out the stitching pattern that we've just imprinted on the fondant, otherwise. The bit here that we're joining together obviously will be attached to the cake, and this will be the front of the sleeve. Okay, so we have like two sort of cone type pieces of fondant really. We already have the arms prepared. So the first thing to do is to attach the arm inside the sleeve with some water. Quite a lot of water in this occasion because you really need that arm to stick into there, and then a little bit over here. And we're just going to sort of make a sort of frilly little sleeve, just like that, simple. And then what we'll need to do, where the join is, we'll attach water all the way down from the top to the bottom, and that's going to stick to the side of the cake. There we go. There's one arm attached. And very simply, the other way round, just finish the other one. So we attach it into the centre and just make a couple of curls on the actual sleeve. This is the tricky one I told you about earlier. It's a little bit trickier to attach to the cake, this one. There's always one bit of the cake that's quite tricky, and on this cake this is it. There we go. Actually, it's not been too bad today. Okay. So now we have the arms attached. Like so. Okay, finally, we're going to attach the head. Now, I told you earlier we were going to use a styrofoam ball because it's so much lighter, and we're actually going to have the head falling forward like a rag doll would. So first of all, we need to get the skin tone colour that I did earlier for the legs and the arms. We don't need very much at all. A nice thin piece. We attach the fondant using water. Water is used for everything. I'm just going to cover it with some water. Now when you do this, it is quite tricky, and there's obviously going to be a part on the ball that's not so neat as the rest. As long as you have the front of the face nice and smooth, it doesn't really matter so much about the tidiness of the back, because we're going to cover that with hair. I've actually got a piece of styrofoam here that I can stick this in while I'm working. Sorry about that, forgot to bring it over earlier. I'm going to place the head on the styrofoam whilst I roll the fondant out. Again, just a little bit of corn flour. Just roll that nice and thinly. I think that's fine. So we need to find the place where it's going to be the front of the face and cover that so that it's perfect. And then we need to gather the fondant to go around the back of the head, where it doesn't matter so much about the neatness. So it's a bit tricky, this bit, so have a little bit of patience. I'm sort of gathering it at the back, and then I'm going to tear off all this excess. I'm just going to sort of tie it in a knot, really. if we were doing something else with it and it was essential that we had it neat all the way round, then I wouldn't have been so flippant with that, but we don't. As long as we've got the face nice and smooth. I've just been polishing the fondant a little bit with my fingers. So that's the front of the head. Now we need to paint the face, attach the eyes, etc. Again, quite simple. It's not a difficult face, it's quite a simple face. I have actually got here one of these plastic plunger cutters. It's an oval shape. We're going to use this for the eyes. And basically the rest is going to be painted on, and that's it really. We're just going to paint the mouth, the nose. We'll paint the details on the eyes once I've cut the basic eye out with white, and then we'll be putting the head onto the body, and then we'll be attaching the hair. So again, I just need to get my colour of my eyes. I've chosen is green. So we're going to have green eyes, and we're going to have the rest of the detail in black. Sorry about this, I'm not very well organised on this stage, but so we need black and green, and we need, for doing this work, we need a very fine brush, which I would recommend probably a number 1 and a 0 as well for the really fine work. So I have a 0 and a number 1 here, a plunger cutter, green and black paste colours, and a tiny little bit of white fondant. Some nice thin white fondant, and cut out the eyes. Make them rub really well on the board to give it a nice clean cut. I'm just going to attach the water now while it's still in the actual, and then we can actually plunge it to where we want it on the face. That's fine. We also need to make her some ears. I almost forgot her ears, poor thing. Okay, so now she has her eyes. Just need to use a little bit more of the skin tone to make her a couple of ears. I'm actually going to use the centre of my garret frill cutter. You can use any round cutter. I don't have a smaller one with me today, so I've used that one. That's perfect, actually. I'm going to cut that in half. And they're perfect for little ears. I'm just going to, again, because it's a sewn doll, just going to stitch them around the edge. And before I forget, we must stitch round the face as well. So we need to go from the top of the head all the way down and around to the chin. And I've actually do a double layer on the head, so like tram lines. Okay, so there's her head stitched. We need to obviously attach the ears simply by just adding a little bit of water to the side. Pretty much level with the eyes. Doesn't matter if they're a bit big or, poor thing, she's got cauliflower ears. But rag dolls do tend to be exaggerated on their limbs and things, so it's not a problem to have them a little bit bigger. Okay, so there's her ears. I'm just going to bend them in a little bit. So there we now need to actually paint the eyes. I'm going to use party green. You can use any colour you want. You can use blue if you want, if you prefer to use blue. Oh, that's not a very good brush actually. I'm going to cut some of those hairs off because they're going to make the that's it. Okay. A little bit of green. And I'm just going to do an oval in the centre of the white oval that I've just put on there. Basically just very simple like that. Again on the other eye. Okay, so you've got the eyes in a lovely green. And then we need to paint the blacks of the eye. To be really careful with the black. I don't want it smudging into the green. But we need to do another oval inside the green oval. If you don't want to do this and you're not very steady with your hands painting wise, what you could do is cut out green fondant and black fondant and just lay them over the top of each other. Oops. And that works too. But I prefer the eye to be flatter myself, so that's why I do it this way. Just take that oval straight to the bottom. That's it. Just like so. Oops, poor little thing's lost her ear. Just attach that again. I just managed to get a little bit of black on there, so I'm just removing it with some water. Okay, so now we've got the eyes. We just need to actually put a little white dot in the base of the eye, and then we're going to put the eyelashes on, the nose and the mouth. Okay, so I'll just use a tiny little bit of white fondant. Literally the tiniest little dot, and you won't need to wet it or anything because the paint's still wet. So you can just, I think that's too big, that's enough for two. Literally that big. So you have the whites of the eye added, and now I'm going to use a brown colour. And I'm just going to use a naught brush, a very fine brush, to actually paint the eyelashes, the nose, the mouth and the eyebrows. I think I'm going to use my paint palette for this. Okay, first of all, I'm going to have to hold it like this. I don't know whether you're going to be able to see, but I just need to paint an outline of the eye in brown. I need to hold this in quite a funny position for you to see. The last thing I want to do is smudge the eyes now I've got to this stage. Quite tricky, this bit. It is quite fiddly. You don't have to do this. You can actually do what I suggested earlier and make the eyes so that they're all overlapping. Just going to paint some eyelashes. I'm going to put this at the end of the thing. It might be easier actually. Yeah. Okay, that's one eye done. Whoops. Oh, I don't know what's happened there. It's quite lumpy, this colour. Okay. I think this is the trickiest part of the actual cake. Okay. I just need to do the eyelashes underneath. And then I'm going to make the eyebrows. Just very simple lines. I'm sorry it was quite difficult for me to show you that, but little nose. Okay, so now we've finished the little face. She's got a pretty little face. We've just got to attach a little bit of blusher to her cheeks. There's two ways we can do this. We can cut two simple circles and stitch around them and stick them on. I'm just going to use a little bit of dust and brush it on. Okay, so we're going to use blush pink and we're just going to dab a little bit on her cheeks just to lighten up her face a little bit. I'm just using just a clean dry brush. Just put a little bit into the lid, shake the excess off. And then just really, I have to do this facing me. Just make a couple of little balls on her cheeks. It just finishes it off really. Okay, now we need to attach the head to the body. And then we're going to make the hair and attach the hair to the body. And then we're just about there, really. Okay, so we want the face, the head, to be looking downwards, like ragdolls sort of hang down. So I'm just going to place the head in the position that I want it to be. Leaning forward as so. Okay, so now we've attached the head to the body. The next stage of the cake will be to complete it by attaching the hair and all the other accessories that the cake needs to be finished. Okay, finally, we're at the final stage where we're just going to make the hair and attach it to the head. I've pre-coloured some fondant in, this is a cream, a dark cream, to give a blonde effect. We're going to give her a fringe today, a small fringe, and just straight long hair at the back. Now we're going to need a fair bit of corn flour for this because we need to roll quite a big piece out. Again, you need to knead your fondant a little while before you start rolling. For this, we're going to need scissors, a pizza wheel and a rolling pin and some water to attach the hair. Okay. Try and roll it into some sort of four-sided shape, whether it's a rectangle, a square, or because we're going to be cutting very thin strips for the hair. So if you can try and keep it in shape, it does make it a lot easier when you come to cut it. Try and do it as thin as you can. I think that's just about thin enough now. To start with, I'm just going to square it off a little bit better than it is now. Okay, and basically I'm just going to be cutting very fine, thin strips. This is a little tad time consuming, but it's a great way to put hair on a rag doll, and it really does give a really good finish to the hair. I just think it looks so much better than rolling it into thin sausages, for the rag doll anyway. This is going to take me a couple of minutes to get to the end of this, but we're probably going to need all of this and possibly a little bit more, I'm not sure. Don't worry about the flour on the other side, that'll just brush off. It's a bit frustrating this. I think you can actually buy tools that have 3 or 4 wheels on them so that you can actually cut it much faster. But I don't have one, so fortunately I have to do it the time consuming way. Okay, we won't be very long now, a couple more minutes and I'll get to the end. It's quite difficult to go really fast doing this job because you want the lines to be quite thin, and if you rush it too much, they'll all break off halfway and stuff, so. Okay, we're almost there. Should be enough. Okay, we're going to attach the hair. What I normally do is I just usually get clumps of the hair and pressure it together. That's obviously going to be far too long, so I'm going to cut it, and then what's left over we can use for the fringe. We just need to use some water, and I need a decent sized brush. Okay, and we're just basically going to cover the top of her head with water so that we can attach all of this to it. Whoops, dropped a couple of segments there. Okay. Okay, so we're starting to attach the hair. I'm folding it in half to make it really nice and thick. Okay. In a moment we shall give her a haircut to neaten the edges, so don't worry too much at this stage if it looks all jangly and higgledy-piggledy. We'll sort that out in a moment. Whoops. Now I'm going to put some in front of her ears and some behind. I want her to have sticky out ears, so. Now I'm just going to put some more down this side, and then we can start working on the fringe. What I'm doing here at the moment, I'm just going to put some water actually on some of the pieces of hair so that I can just sort of stick some of the pieces together and make it look more realistic. What I'm going to do now before I go any further is I'm going to give her a haircut so that the hair is a pretty even length, and I'm literally just going to use scissors to do that. Sorry, I'm just trying to, that's it, that's fine. I just need to cut a little bit round here. Okay. Okay, a little bit more on the back because I want it to be nice and thick. I'm painting a little bit of water so that some of the hair sticks together. You can just paint over it, you don't have to paint under or whatever, just as it looks quite natural. Okay. And it's quite nice because it just hangs then. Quite nice. Now the last thing left to do is to make the fringe. go to the middle of the head. Obviously we don't want the fringe to be too long. I want you to be able to see at least one of her eyebrows. Okay. Right, it's a bit of a fiddly job this, I'm afraid, but it's quite good fun. Now this, where we're joining the fringe to the main part of the hair, don't worry because we're going to cover all of that with a bow. So you don't need to worry if it's not too tidy. I'm just going to put a little bit more on the back to tidy that bit up. And that can go like so. Okay. I think we're almost there. Just a couple more strands by that ear. Tedious this bit, but sorry about that. There we go. I think a couple more bits on the fringe and we're done. A little bit more at the back. I'm sorry about this, guys. I just think it looks a little bit bare in one part there. Yeah, that should do it. We usually need the full amount that I make. It's okay, definitely needed a bit more by there. Okay. I'm quite happy that that looks quite good. Now the next stage is to attach the bow to the hair, but we've already made the bow, so we just need to brush this to one side. And we need to, now if you remember we made the bow earlier and we formed it with a couple of pieces of sponge. That's perfectly formed now and it's ready to attach to the hair. So using a little bit of water, I'm just going to attach it right on the top where the fringe meets the rest of the cake, and the same goes for the big bow, which we're going to attach to the front of the cake. I think we're going to need quite a bit of water on this as well. Normally I would use some royal icing, but I think on this occasion we'll get away with water, actually. But what I'm doing is I'm making it quite sticky by mixing quite a lot of water on it, and that way it should stick quite nicely to the front of the cake. Just in the middle of where the handles are. Now what I'm going to do to make sure it sticks, I'm going to use my brush and go inside the bow where I've attached all that water and hold it against the cake to make sure it sticks. And the same on the other side. Okay, and finally we need to finish the little bracelet. I've obviously showed you how to make all the little beads. We've imprinted the design, the pattern that we need to follow. And now it's a question of just attaching all the beads with some water. So you can make this as random as you like. I don't know if you remember these sweetie bracelets, but they were so pretty and colourful. It's perfect to go with this cake. I'm going to put a circle of water where the circle that I imprinted is and start attaching the beads. If you put some water between them as well, that helps. They can be as random as you like. And you can even put two of the same colour next to each other. You have to press quite firm. I've got a little skin coloured one here. And the pink one. A blue one. And just continue round until you've made the circle, basically. Oops. Can start to see now the bracelet taking shape. Let's do that. That's got a bit of a That's it. The pink one, I think. When we get to the end, just to finish it off completely, I'm going to cut out a fondant heart and attach it to the bracelet like a charm. And then the final thing to finish the cake is just to attach some ribbon to the board. I've chosen this aqua colour to match the board. I think that will just finish it off nicely. Okay, a couple more and we're done. I think we've got room for one more little bead in there. Okay, so there we have the bracelet. And we just need to make the little heart out of a piece of fondant. I think I might make it yellow actually. Or shall I do pink? No, I think we'll go for pink. Tiniest little bit. And I have a little heart-shaped cutter here that I'm going to use. So there we go. just going to make a hole in the middle of the heart, just so that you can use a number 2 nozzle or a number 2.5 or something, or 1.5. I've just put the end of the paintbrush through, and I can just use actually a little bit of this yellow. I'm just going to roll a very thin sausage. I'm going to put it through the heart, like so. And then we're going to stick it with a little bit of water. Finally, we're going to cover the board with some ribbon. So we just need to attach a little bit of glue to the board, and we have our cake complete. I'm just going to get some glue. I normally use Pritt Stick. Just put a little bit Pritt Stick on the board, and the ribbon attaches quite nicely. I'm going to take it off the top of here because of those just a little bit. I'm starting at the back. Turn the table round. And there we have it, your completed ragdoll cake.